Well, welcome back to day 3 of WordPress Disaster Week. My name is Nathan Ingram. I am the host here at iThemes Training, and I am super excited about today's webinar because I'm going to get to talk to you folks about how to leverage all the things we've been talking about this week with iThemes products, iThemes Security, Backup Buddy, iThemes Sync, leveraging all those tools to make money in your business. So for those of you who work with clients, this day is for you. Just a little bit of background about me. I've been doing client work since 1995. I'm celebrating 25 years this year building websites for clients. I built and sold my first website way back in 1995. I started working with WordPress in about 2008. I was all WordPress by 2010. So this is 10 years of WordPress for me as well. Back in the day, when I found WordPress, I found iThemes at the same time. And I began to build my WordPress business around iThemes tools, Backup Buddy, later iThemes Security. All of those were tools that I started to use to build a great recurring revenue stream in my business from WordPress care plans. Managing WordPress sites over the long term for clients, that's what really has built a successful business for me. And iThemes was part of that from the very beginning. So way before I ever started presenting here on iThemes Training, I was an iThemes customer and actually learned WordPress here on iThemes Training. Back in those days, it was called webdesign.com, but here on iThemes Training is where I learned to do WordPress as well. So it is a real privilege for me to be able to hopefully play a little bit of a similar role in your world if you are just thinking about getting started providing care plans for clients, or even if you're already doing care plans for clients. Hopefully I can sharpen your sword a little bit today and give you a little more pointers, maybe make it a little sharper on what you're doing. Barbara was around back in those days. There's a few folks still lingering from all those days. Yeah. All right. So let me just share once again the link to the handout for session 1 in the chat room. If you're watching this on the replay, it'll be a link right below the video. But go ahead and get the handout up on the screen. I'm not doing slides for this because I want this really to be something you can pick up and use and maybe copy and paste and turn into your own checklist or starting of a checklist if you want to. Those of you who've been around my presentations know that I am a big proponent of checklists, because as soon as I start to rely on my own memory, I am going to forget something, and probably it's the most important thing that I'm going to forget. I just know myself too well. So this is the beginnings of a checklist for your own business and providing care plans. Just another little bit of disclaimer here. I'm going to talk about what I do. Okay, I manage over 100 sites for clients and have done that for quite a long time. Some large, some small, some micro sites, some very large membership and e-commerce sites. I'm going to talk to you today about what I do and how I set up iThemes products to work in my business. The practices that I'm explaining in this webinar are my own, okay? They are not necessarily endorsed by iThemes. I'm just speaking to you from my own experience. So can we all agree on that? I just want to provide you some experience from my perspective, and no guarantees, all that sort of thing. So the long and the short of it is, hey, don't sue me if something doesn't go right for you. But I think you'll find that this might be helpful. So let's start off with a very basic discussion that is always a fun one when we start looking at clients. Should you give client admin access to a WordPress website? What do you think? Should you give clients admin access? And this is always a fun discussion because there's usually people on polar extremes of this issue. And so there's yeses and nos coming up in the chat room. So again, if you're just joining us in GoToWebinar, lots of folks have joined since we kicked off. So ithemes.com/chat is the chat location. Very important that you're in the chat room today because I can't watch the GoToWebinar questions or the chat area there and present at the same time. It's going to be really tough. So should you give client admin access? Now, here's the thing. As a matter of principle, I believe the client owns the website. And this has come to me based on many, many rescue clients that have come to me over the years who've had a WordPress website built by somebody else that didn't give them keys to the website. And it's kind of a pain to get all that stuff set up. So As a matter of principle, the client owns the website. They should therefore have access to an administrator user. Now, notice how I phrase that. They should have access to an administrator user. They shouldn't have an administrator login just to use for everything. That would be foolish. However, I believe, just as a matter of principle, you ought to give the clients the keys to the website that he or she purchased. Okay? So, what I do, generally speaking, I give clients an administrator login, but only for use in case of emergencies. They actually get a document from me that has their break glass in case of emergency sort of username and password. That's the sort of thing. Hey, if I get hit by a bus and you need access to your website, this is how you do it. Okay? However, for the regular editing of the website, I give the client an editor user. This is the one that you should use to edit your website. And that user is going to have everything that they need to get into most of the areas of the website they should get into. And everything that they don't need to get into is hidden then from that user. So I also tell the client in training and on that document, hey, if you go in and break something as an administrator user because you logged in as the administrator, that's not covered by your care plan. So you're going to pay for that. So you have to put there's a carrot and a stick here, and that's the stick. So that's just my take. You do with that what you want to do. But this is the way I've been doing this. I've been approaching this issue for many years, and it's been very successful for me. Okay, let's get into one of the most common questions that we get here on iThemes Training when it comes to iThemes security. How should I set it up? There's a million settings. Well, not really, but there's a lot of settings in iThemes security. How do I know which ones to set? What's the best practice, and so forth? So a couple of links I've given you right away. Right here in the document, there's a link to a webinar. This is the webinar from last month that Michael Moore and I did on iThemes Security Setup Essentials for 2020. We walk through every single feature of iThemes Security Pro, and Michael goes into great lengths of explaining the whats and whys of each of those. There's also a link there to the iThemes Security Help Center that has tons of documentation. If you've never been to the iThemes Help Center, there's great documentation on all the iThemes products, lots of little short videos about various things. Super important. So keep those links, and you can go. I'm going to be like a stone skipping across the surface of the water today on the settings. However, you can go into greater detail on this webinar. I just realized I didn't link the zip file, which I'm going to do right now. 1 second, and I'll update this document. For those of you watching on the replay, I will have this document updated. So here's the thing. Everything that in iThemes Security, you may know this, but in iThemes Security, there is an import-export feature, and it is delightful. So right here on this page, you can import a file. I'm going to drop the file in the chat room. The zip file that I just dropped at ithemes.com/chat is going to have all the settings that I'm just about to put into iThemes Security. Okay, or actually they're already there, and I'm just going to walk you through what I've checked and what I haven't. So you can download that zip file, import it into your iThemes Security, and it's going to look like what you just are about to see on the screen here. So hopefully that's going to make things a lot easier for you. Now, there's a few other settings we'll cover at the end that you may want to go and tweak for yourself and then make your own export. And you can do that right here. Just put in an email address, hit export, and you will have emailed to you the same sort of zip file that is in, I just dropped as a link in the chat room. And again, for those of you listening on the replay and you download the handout, this will be a link to download the zip file right there from the handout. Okay? That makes sense to everybody? So let's look at the typical settings that I use in setting up iThemes Security for client work. Bud is asking, can you use this for the free version? Let's see. Import export is in the, no, it's a pro feature. So you must have the pro feature to do the import export. So if you're using the free version, you're not going to have any of these settings that are flagged pro right here. But a lot of the settings you'll just be able to replicate by watching what I'm doing here. Fair enough? However, honestly, and I'm going to step on a soapbox here just for a minute. I realize that WordPress is free. I realize also that lots of themes and plugins are free. However, The plugins and themes that you base your business on, you should pay for. Here's why. If I'm basing my business around a great security plugin, a great backup plugin, a great theme, other important tools like maybe a form plugin or whatever, I want to pay for those plugins because I want that developer to stay in business. Because if I'm not a developer and I'm basing my business around a certain cluster of themes and plugins, it is to my advantage to pay for the plugin. That way, the plugin stays around and I can expect great support. That makes sense? So that's just my little soapbox on that. Also, by the way, if you're using a free plugin, and there's lots of really great, in my plugin stack I use for most sites, I've got some fantastic free plugins. A lot of those developers have a little donate button on their plugin page in the WordPress plugin directory. You ought to donate to those folks. Do you know how encouraging it is to a developer who just puts out a plugin based on his or her own goodwill, just to get a nice note, a great review, a little, $5, $10, a little donation? If you're using a free plugin on all your sites, you ought to give that developer a generous donation, because it's just such an encouragement to that person to, hey, keep doing the project, keep working on it. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now because I can go on that little rant forever. Okie dokie. Let's start off here at the top, and I'm just going to work my way down through the iTheme security settings. Now, I believe, Josh, are you with us already in the chat? I think Josh from iTheme support is going to be with us to answer any particularly technical questions that may come up that I don't know the answers to, but hopefully he'll be around if he's not there now. All right, so the security check, typically, and I know some of the folks at iThemes aren't going to like this, I usually bypass that completely because I want to go in and just deal with the settings right off the bat. But if you click the secure site button, it's going to set up all of the settings that we realize don't conflict in most situations. So this is not bad. I would rather go in and do things myself because I want the specific settings. That's just me. You can do what you want. Okay. There's Michael. Michael Moore is there with us in the chat. Everybody say hi to Michael. He did a great job the last couple days. So I'm going to go into global settings now. And here are the settings that I'll typically use here. Most of these are on by default. We want to allow security to write to the WP config and the htaccess file. You can configure any of the messages here. I often will change this message so that I know that it's iTheme security that's giving me this message if the client is locked out. So there's various lockout messages that you can change if you like. Always enable the repeat blacklist offender, and this is going to tell you what the thresholds are. These are the default settings, and they are good in most cases. So basically what this is saying is if a person, so every 15 minutes, if somebody gets locked out, the threshold is they're going to get locked out for 15 minutes. If someone gets locked out 3 times in 7 days, they get put on the blacklist for the site. So that's a good thing. And if you want, if you're having a site that's getting attacked more, you can up the threshold. If you have a site where users are accidentally getting blacklisted, then you might want to soften up on these settings a little bit, but the default are good in most cases. I'm also going to add my current IP to the whitelist as I'm setting up the plugin. I'm not going to put that there because I don't want anybody to ping me. But there you go. You can set up some groups here as well who can manage iTheme security. Typically, that's going to be all administrator users. How do I want to log in the database? I'll typically change that to 30 days. It's 60 by default. That log can get very large sometimes, especially on very active sites. So I think 30 days for me is a good setting. You can set that to whatever you'd like to do. You want to allow iThemes to track plugin usage. Now, so why would you do this? All right, I realize there's privacy issues and so forth. By allowing iThemes to track usage anonymously, you are giving us lots of great information on how to improve the plugin. We can't access your passwords, your users, any of that stuff. That's not what we're interested in. We want you to have a better plugin, and getting this sort of telemetry information is super helpful in helping us build better features and improve what iTheme security is already doing. I will typically hide security in the admin bar just because that's what I do. And then you can decide whether you want the grade report on or showing the error codes. Typically, I leave those off and by default. So those are the settings for global. In the notification center, this is an important place to make some changes. All right. This is a very important change. Oftentimes, how many of you over in settings in general, you put your email address in as the admin user, like right here, nathan@ithemes.com is the admin user for wpnathan.com. Here's the problem. That's going to be the from email in the notification center by default. Okay? If wpnathan.com tries to send an email out as nathan@ithemes.com, that is email spoofing. And oftentimes those notifications are going to end up in the spam folder because I'm actually sending from a domain name that this website doesn't really have a right to send from. Does that make sense? So, and I use this strategy for forms as well and for any notifications like WooCommerce order info and all that. I just make it no reply at the domain of the site. That way, this is a domain where, WordPress can send email from wpnathan.com without hitting any spoofing issues. So that's what I typically do as a best practice. Generally speaking, also, Heather's asking, does it have to be a legitimate email address? No, absolutely. That's why I make no reply, because you know what? If somebody replies to a no reply, they deserve to get no reply, in my opinion. So this is, they're just getting what they ask for at that point. I will typically only send these things to me. Oftentimes, all administrator users are checked. And if the client, for some reason, has an administrator user, maybe I don't want them getting all those notifications. I don't want the client to ask a bunch of questions where, they don't have to. I don't want to create a bunch of extra work for myself to answer client questions. So normally, I'll send those only to myself. Now, which notifications do I typically want to send? I will normally not send automatic updates. Depending on the site, I will or will not send file changes. If it's a small microsite, I don't even worry about it. I don't send file changes. If it's a larger site that's maybe higher profile, I will, and I will send that file change warning. We're going to go through some file change detection settings in a little bit as well. I normally don't send an active user email or inactive user email. Magic links are set. I do send a malware scan to myself. Security Digest, I will send that on a weekly basis to myself. Settings export email is just all set there. I typically don't send a site lockout email. If somebody gets locked out, that's awesome. I don't want to know about that. The two-factor email, because we're going to set up two-factor, that's set up. Unrecognized login, I normally do not send that email. Let's see, login from users. Yeah, we want that one set up if we're going to use the unrecognized trusted devices option. And we're going to save the settings. So those are the notifications I will typically set up. Let me catch some questions that are there in the chat. Let's see. Okay, no questions for me. That's awesome. But a good discussion going on there in the chat. Enjoy seeing that happening. All right, user groups is a new setting here in iTheme Security, and if you've never taken a look at that, it's pretty cool. In one spot you can decide what various roles in WordPress can do. So that's pretty neat. Take a look at that if you haven't looked at that before. 404 detection. All of this is on by default. I don't change any of these things typically. We had some questions the other day about what if you're getting lots of 404 notices about certain files. And if it's a file that you don't mind being accessed, maybe it's an image file or whatever, just add that to the whitelist here and you don't get those notifications. You can also ignore various files here, but the default settings are what I typically use. I normally do not use away mode because I want my dashboard accessible all the time. If I'm going to have to get into the WordPress dashboard in the middle of the night, it's an emergency and I don't want it to fool with away mode. So I just leave that off. It's a nice feature though in certain cases. Whoops. Banned users. I leave the defaults here. So WP Nathan's been going on for a while. There's a bunch of banned IP addresses here for one reason or another. This is always on. I want to use somebody else's blacklist to pull in features. I will say this, by the way, I had a weird thing happen with hackerpeer.com's blacklist in the last month. One of my clients that uses authorize.net with a membership site, the authorize.net IP address block got stuck on hackerpeer.com's blacklist. So authorize.net was not able to talk back to the WordPress site to validate purchases happen because the IP addresses was on the blacklist. So just be aware of that. This is a blacklist that you don't necessarily know what's going on, but that's the only time in, gosh, I can't remember how many years that I've ever had an issue with that. So just be aware that could be something that's going on, but I just don't have an issue typically. So the default settings here are good. I normally do not use the database backups. This is a very rudimentary database backup that iThemes Security does. This is if you don't have Backup Buddy. If you do have Backup Buddy, don't even worry about this. The Backup Buddy system is much, much better. File change detection, I will typically have this on. You can go through and remove certain directories or certain files and folders if you'd like to. Always enable the online file comparison. That's super helpful. It's going to compare any changes with WordPress core files or an iThemes plugin with any changes that happen. It's pretty nice. So all that's on by default. So file permissions, this is pretty important. This is something I actually do at the end of preparing a site for launch. When you look at this, oftentimes by default, I'm seeing this more and more, at least on my servers, the root path doesn't have the correct permissions, as well as the WP config and the HT access. We recommend that you lock down the entire file with no access at all. The typical WordPress or the typical installation permissions are 644 and 444. So normally what I'll do is right at site launch, and I think I mentioned this in, yeah, right here. After you've done all the settings, usually caching plugins like to write to WP config and HT access, maybe some other plugins also. After you've done all those updates, go in and change your file permissions. And it's really easy to do. I'm in cPanel here for WP Nathan, and I'm going to go in to the public HTML folder, and I'm going to select the WP config and the HT access file and change permissions. And I'm going to change those so it's 444. And when I do that, reload permissions, they go green. And I can change the directory permissions as well. It wants it to be 755. So we'll change that. And now we get all green lights. So that's pretty nice. Stacy's asking, don't you need to let iThemes Security write to HT access? Yes, and this setting up here allows it to do that. But for other plugins, you want those locked down. That's helpful so that really nobody at that point can write to those files. Make sense? But again, I do that at the very end, because otherwise, if you make those permissions changes while you're doing iThemes Security setup, you may have to go undo them and then do them again if you have to deal with a caching plugin later. Okay. Local brute force protection. I use the default settings here. I also check on automatically ban anybody using admin. Hopefully you know enough that you do not have a user on WordPress called admin. If you do, you should get rid of it immediately. Hackers will oftentimes try to use admin because it's the default user, and that's just a bad idea. So default settings there. Going to set up the network brute force protection. Normally there's an email address here. You hit the button and you'll get an API key to connect to the brute force network and get the site registered under it. Password requirements, I typically leave, I want strong passwords enabled for administrator users only. You can do password expiration if you want to, or refuse compromise, but this is actually a good thing to have. That should have been checked. I want to check all my users for refuse compromise passwords. This is one of the best features in iThemes Security, in my opinion, because this is going to check all of your username password combinations against the Have I Been Pwned database, and that's really super helpful. So, all right. SSL. I'm going to have this set to enabled, so it's going to force SSL on the front and back end of the site. Very important. If you have another SSL plugin that does this, you don't need it because iThemes Security has that built in. System tweaks. I check all of these. One area that I want to, actually a couple of things I want to mention. Occasionally, if you have a site that's using long query strings, a query string is this right here, where you've got a really long URL with a bunch of ampersands in it. That's what makes it a query. Or it starts with a question mark. That's the query string. Anything after that. If you have a site that's using a really super long query string, occasionally, if you have this checked, it might break. So just be aware that, if something stops working and you're using query strings, it's probably this setting right there. So just be aware of that. The rest of these things, again, a long URL, long URL up here. Typically I turn that on. If the site is using a long URL for some reason, you may want to leave that off. The other question we get a lot is, if I disable PHP in plugins or themes, does that make the theme or plugin stop working? The answer is no, of course not. I mean, there wouldn't be a setting there otherwise. Why would we have a setting that makes a plugin stop working? That's a bad idea. What is happening, though, is PHP execution from within that folder. So what happens a lot of times is a hacker will upload a PHP file and then try to access that file directly to compromise your site. So this stops that from happening. The way that most WordPress plugins and themes, the way that works is WordPress core calls them, but you're not actually talking directly to that PHP file from your browser. So this is a super important feature that locks down a lot of the ways a hacker will try to compromise your site. Does that make sense? So long and the short of it is, in most cases, I check all those boxes and we're good to go. I will always change the WordPress salt as one of the things in the WordPress launch process because I'm working from a base site. And by the way, those of you who follow my process and you set up a base site that you're building all your sites on, make sure that you change the salts. Otherwise, every site you build is going to have the same salts, and that's a bad idea. So make sure you change those every time you launch a site, and iTheme Security makes that super easy. On here on WordPress Tweaks, I use all the default settings for all of this. All these are checked. I want to get rid of the file editor. That's a major vulnerability if somebody gets access to the WP admin. I'm going to disable XML RPC because I do not use the WordPress app, nor do I use Jetpack on a typical site. So I will disable XML RPC. I'm going to take the recommended settings here as well for authentications and for the REST API. I don't use the REST API, so I turn that off. I will also disable login messages, error messages, because I don't want if a hacker is trying to figure out if a username or password is there or not, the login message can tell them, oh, that username doesn't exist, and they'll try another username. This way, disabling the login message it prevents us from showing that information to a hacker. I typically leave this off simply because I've had users have issues with having to make a unique nickname, so I leave that off typically. The rest of the stuff, I have the default settings. Turn on, default, and I turn that on as well. There's a question from Shayna in the chat about what is a salt. Let me show that to you real quick. A salt is basically a string of characters that is used for authentication. It is in your WP config file, and it looks like this. It's all this stuff right here. Now, you can generate a salt this is in every WordPress WP config. You can generate a salt by going here, and every time you view that page, it is a brand new, it changes all that. And so it basically replaces all that stuff here in the salt and basically prevents all of your salts from looking the same if you're starting from a base site. Also, by the way, if you change the salts, it logs out everybody. So this is let me just show you that, by the way. One of the things that I read, if you have a site that has been hacked or compromised, or you want to log out everybody from a site, just generate a new salt. And when you drop in a new salt, all these keys here, if I can get it highlighted correctly. All right, we save that, and look what happens in WordPress. I get logged out. Ooh, wait a minute. I may have broken something. Okay, I broke something. Just a minute. All right. Awesome. Let's see if this fixes it. I probably missed a character when I copied the salts. Yeah, that worked. Okay, so there you go. So if you don't want to do that, then go here into iTheme Security and dump your salts right here. Change the salt, save settings, and I'll be logged out. Boom, because we have a new salt key. Oh, good. Hang on a minute. This is left over from when I tested this earlier, and I do not have the appropriate two-factor set up on my device because I changed it earlier. So, pardon me one moment while I fix this little issue. Sorry about that. Okay. That's what I get for taking an unplanned rabbit trail. Okay. Henry's asking if you disable XML RPC, you don't get pingbacks. Yeah, that's true, but I mean, who uses pingbacks these days? Not many people. Not many people. Pingbacks to me are needless server traffic. That's my opinion. If you want pingbacks, then leave XML RPC open. Okie dokie. So Stephen wanted to know, how did I fix that? Pretty simple. What I did was, let me just show you what I did. I'm going to log out again, and it's going to make me redo what I just did. So let me log in as me. And I'm going to get the two-factor prompt. So what I just did was I went into cPanel, and I just renamed the iTheme Security Pro plugin directory and hit refresh. And I'm in. That's it. Then I'll go and re-enable it. And as long as you don't go to the plugins page, it is as though iTheme Security was never deactivated. See, it just appeared right back. Does that make sense? Okie dokie. That was a really long rabbit trail, but hopefully you got something out of that. So those are all those settings. Let us go down to, let's see, where are we? WordPress Tweaks, Magic Links. Magic Links are awesome. Enable lockout bypass. That's good. Leave that active. Malware scanning, no settings necessary there. Passwordless login, you can set that up if you'd like to. I haven't enabled that for client sites yet. Probably ought to. It's a really nice feature. Privilege escalation, if you need to. So this is super cool. How many of you ever have to give admin access to somebody doing plugin troubleshooting with some plugin company? And how many of you have done that, and then you come back to the site a year later? Oh, I forgot to kill the admin user I made for that plugin company, right? So you've got this massive potential vulnerability of this admin user that's just sitting there on your site. So here, with privilege escalation, oops, hang on. Because I logged out, I needed to refresh. Privilege escalation. We've got that enabled. So now when we go to the users page, I don't have another admin user set up, but let's just say we wanted to make this one something we gave access to some plugin person. We can go down here to look here. We can set the temporary role to administrator for 10 days. And after that happens, Michael, I believe I'm correct, it reverts to what the role was beforehand. Is that right? I think that's correct. So pretty nifty. There are plugins out there that do this, but this is super helpful if you, like me, have ever come back to a site a year later and gone, oh, I forgot to delete that user. Christine, that's a great question. Hey, Michael, can the user who's extended go in and change their role or change their extended time? I don't know. That's a great question. Okay. moving on down the list. Gosh, we got to hurry because I got Backup Buddy still to go to yet. Let's see. So many cool settings. I've lost my place. Privilege. Okay, Recaptcha. So you'll want to go in and set up your Recaptcha. This puts a, you may have noticed on the login screen down here at the bottom, there was the Recaptcha badge. This is good. Setting up a Recaptcha on the login, user registration, and new comments area just so cuts down on hackers. It just about eliminates brute force attacks. It's a super great way to really make the site a lot more secure. Here's the import-export, the security dashboard. If you want to enable that, you can do it. Setting up two-factor is here. So I'm going to skip through the rest of these other things. You can configure trusted devices. If you want to know how to do all this, go to the iThemes Help Center. There's lots of great videos on that and documents on how to set up all of those things. So set up the way you'd like it to be, and then go into import-export and export your standard settings so that you have it where you can then import it on every other site that you manage, which is really helpful. Or if you do like I do and you build from a starter site, just set up this iTheme security settings once, and then I use Backup Buddy to replicate that starter site so all the settings are made already when I start off. Does that make sense? Christine is asking about a webinar on doing a startup site. That was the Beaver Builder Developer course that we did back in December. Okay. So you've got all that set up, pretty nifty. Now, a few things that you'll want to do as you launch the site. You'll want to make sure your network brute force is there. You need to re-enroll. So you don't want to do the network brute force as one of your basic settings because you'll need to enroll it as a new site when it launches on the new domain name. Make sense? Also, you'll want to enable the SSL. So if you were developing the site on a non-SSL, maybe it's local or whatever, local host or whatever, enable that SSL, change the salts, generate the Recaptcha keys, turn on version management if you want to, and do the file permissions check, make sure everything's green. So those are the things I do as part of the site launch process. I just thought I'd give those to you as a list as well. So for those of you who came in late, in the doc, I put download this zip file, which I forgot to link. So here's the link that should have been there. Lydia, thanks for sharing that as well. So if you're watching this on the replay, this will be a link and I'll have that fixed, but I can't do that at this moment. All right. Makes sense, everybody? Tommy's asking for that December webinar link. That was a premium webinar. It did require you had to pay for a seat for that webinar. Or if you join the iThemes Toolkit or iThemes Training membership, I believe you can go back and watch that. It was a good webinar, if I do say so myself. Okay. The handout for session 1 is here. Any other questions about what we have just gone over? Okay, let's move into Backup Buddy. So again, a full explanation of Backup Buddy settings are here in the iThemes Backup Buddy Help Center, which is an awesome resource, especially for those of you that have been around for a while on iThemes. Maybe you haven't known about the Help Center. It is wonderful. There's lots of great explanations of various features and little short videos about each one. The support team has done a wonderful job over the last couple of years in really building out the Help Center. So here's a few things that I've learned over the years. If you're having issues with Backup Buddy working correctly, and you go, oh, Backup Buddy sucks, it never works on my... Listen, 99.999% chance it's a hosting-related issue. You're likely on a host that's going to have problems with any backup plugin. Either it's a managed WordPress environment where backup plugins are disallowed, or it's a really, really bad, low-horsepower shared hosting that just doesn't have the resources for any backup plugin to work. So just... it is what it is. And it's not that Backup Buddy has problems. It's that just about any backup plugin has problems. Now, here's the thing about Backup Buddy and the reason that I still use it. It is my plugin of choice, even after 10 years of being with iThemes. Backup Buddy, like few others, has really super granular settings that let you make tweaks so that it can work in just about any server environment, okay? There are very few places where I haven't been able to get Backup Buddy to work. So Backup Buddy support is awesome. And I do want to, down here at the bottom, I've given you a little cheat sheet, okay? These are a group of settings that I have been able to use over the years to get Backup Buddy to work when it would fail out of the box. Generally, a really low horsepower shared server situation. So do these settings, and oftentimes this is going to fix your problem just right out of the gate. If these don't work, go to Backup Buddy support, and they may be able to tweak even further for you. But I've had really good results with these settings. All right. So, setting up Backup Buddy. Let's see here. Oh, by the way, this is a good reason why in your WordPress care plan, you really ought to have your own hosting platform, whether you're reselling for a host or whatever, so that you don't run into issues. Set up a hosting platform where Backup Buddy works well. It's a good VPS, or it's a good, it's iThemes hosting that is built for iThemes products. And it works, and so you're not going to have to deal with troubleshooting weirdo technical problems. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents. So as far as a backup strategy, typically what I do is I perform a full site backup every day on every website. Those backups are stored off-site in a remote destination with 30 backups archived. All of this can be set up once in Backup Buddy to run for the future, and I do this as part of the launch process. I set up the Backup Buddy schedules and all of that as part of the launch process. Now, you say, why in the world do you do a full backup every day and store 30 days? Well, because of this. You certainly could do a weekly full site backup and a daily database backup. You can do that. However, if I'm in a situation where oh my gosh, the website is down, I want to restore, I do not want to be in the situation of having to cobble together, okay, I gotta restore these files and go find the latest data. I want to restore yesterday's backup that has everything. Does that make sense? So that's why I do a full backup every day with 30 days of backups. Now, depending on your server horsepower, that might not be a good scenario, which is why the default settings for Backup Buddy, or the recommended settings, are do a full site backup once a week and then a database backup every day. But if you've got a good VPS or a good dedicated server, or you're using iThemes hosting, you can do a full backup every day. You should be just fine. All right. So Lydia's asking, what remote destinations do I typically use? I've used S3 for years. It's great. It's reliable. It's a little tricky to set up. If you're not a technical person, it can kind of be tough to set up. That's why Backup Buddy Stash is so wonderful. It's just so easy to use. You just put in your iThemes username and password and you're done. Matter of fact, I'm going to do that here in just a minute. So here's how you set up Backup Buddy for the long haul. Go in here and into Backup Buddy. I'm going to start off by creating a remote destination. I'm going to show you how easy it is to set up Backup Buddy Stash as a remote destination. I'm going to go here. I'm going to enter in my iThemes username and password. I'm going to hit enter or submit. And done. That's it. That's all I have to do. Now, I will typically go in here and set up, I'll change the destination name to something else. I will have, for my purposes, 30 full backups and one of every other kind, just because I don't want a whole bunch of other types of backups piling up if for some reason they do that. So this is my typical setting, whether it's Backup Buddy or iThemes Stash or S3 or whatever I'm using. I want 30 full backups. So what happens here is on the 31st day, when it uploads a new backup to this remote destination, it's going to delete the oldest one and add the newest one. So there's only 30 full backups in the remote destination. And it knows the difference. Backup Buddy knows the difference between all these types of backups. I will then also hit test settings just to make sure we're connected correctly, which we should be. Yep, test successful, so we're good to go. And I'm going to add the destination. So we're done. All right, so this destination is added. I'm also going to set up Stash Live. Now, I set this up about 2 hours ago, and Stash Live is still sipping data over. Now, let me talk about Stash Live just for a minute. And before I do that, let me address what Christine just said. Why do I keep so many backups? Here's why. If the client site gets hacked and we don't realize it for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, maybe a week. The site's hacked. If you only have 2 or 3 days of backups, the only backup you have is of a hacked site. You can't restore an unhacked site. Or if some user error happened a week ago on the site, well, if you don't have 30 days of backups, then you have nothing to restore. So that's why I keep that many backups. Does that make sense? Now let me talk about Backup Buddy Stash Live. Stash Live was originally designed for those low horsepower hosting situations where the server just doesn't have enough power to actually zip up the contents of the website. The zip command just won't run. There's not enough server resources. So what we do is we slowly just sip over, file at a time, very low bandwidth, very low resources. It does take some time. So it's been running at this point for about maybe an hour and a half, and we're at about 40%. So, after a few hours, this will be done. For a large site, it can take some time. So this site is, I think, about 100 megabytes with all of the stuff that's on it. So actually, it's 297 megabytes. So it's sipping over. It's 40% done after an hour and a half. Once it's done, it's done. And then you have a good backup. Now, the cool thing about Stash Live is, let's say it's an e-commerce site and somebody makes a purchase. Well, guess what? As soon as that database changes or as soon as a file is added, Stash Live springs into action and sips over that change in real time, which means that Stash Live is not just a wonderful solution for a low horsepower server situation. It's also great for sites that have frequent user updates, like an e-commerce site, or maybe it's an LMS site with courseware of some sort, or a membership site where members are doing various things. It may be, so let's say the site crashes and the last backup you have is yesterday. Well, that's great in a lot of cases. But if it's an e-commerce site, well, I've just lost all my orders for the last day or until the site was backed up last. With Stash Live, it's going to have all the changes up to, pretty much real time. So it's a really great solution for that situation. The other cool thing is Stash Live gives you real-time malware scans, which means that's something you can put on your care plan. You offer real-time malware scans for your sites if you have it set up in Stash Live. So you're going to get an email if the site has malware right then. Every file that gets scanned after it's changed and brought over into Stash Live, that file is scanned as it's brought into the Stash Live server. So that is pretty stinking awesome. It's a great feature, and it might even give you the option of having another tier in your care plan that provides this real-time malware scanning, or a tier, to supply Stash Live to an e-commerce site or a membership site of some sort. Instead of charging $100 a month, maybe you could charge $200 a month or $250 a month for this sort of level of management. And you said, well, Stash Live space, it's going to get expensive. Yeah, but think if, you're certainly, for the few dollars a month you might pay for extra Stash Live space for a big e-commerce site or whatever, you could charge $100 a month more, maybe $50 a month more. It's a great way to add on additional income to your care plan. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? So what I'm going to do as I'm setting up Backup Buddy to run, I'm going to run a full site backup as soon as I've set everything up, gotten the remote destination connected. Michael's asking both Stash Live and remote. Yes. I will set up both because I can't have too many backups. Steven is asking if the server has the horsepower, would normal backup be preferred to Stash Live? Yeah. So, I would use, I have a dedicated server with Liquid Web. It's a beast. And okay, it looks like I've got an issue here. Let's try again. It has plenty of horsepower. And so for most sites, I'm not running Stash Live. For e-commerce sites, for membership sites, those sorts of things, Stash Live is a great option. And in those cases, I'd run both. You can't have too many backups, in my opinion. Heather is saying iThemes isn't what it used to be. Heather, I don't even know how to respond to that. I rely on iThemes as the core of all the products that I use in my care plans. And, I don't know what else to say about that. Carla, can you use regular backups and Stash Live at the same time? Yep, that's exactly what I just did. So in the process of setting the site up, I've created the remote destination. I've set up Stash Live if I've needed it, and I'm running a test backup right here. So I'm also at this point going to send to the offsite destination and delete the local backup after delivery. So I'm going to send to my stash, and then I'm going to go over here and watch. All right, there's the backup I just created. So my server time is off. So this is the one we just made. So I'm going to watch this. Okay, look, there, it disappeared. Did you see that? It disappeared. So that backup disappeared. And if I go over, actually, if I go here to destinations and I scroll down and look at the files on that destination, boom, there it is. So I have just verified that the backup does in fact run. And when I send it to the remote destination and set it to delete, it actually happens. So that's good. Now I'm going to set up the schedule. I'm going to go here to add a schedule. I'm going to call this daily backup, full backup, once daily. Leave this alone. I'm going to tell it, I'm going to push it over to my stash and delete the local backup. That way I don't have local backups piling up. I know it's going to be over the remote destination and I'm done. All right, so it's ready to go. So I've set up my daily backup. The last thing I'm going to do is change a couple of the settings, which I don't have on the handout. So there's one very important setting I'm going to change. On the general settings area, I want the number of local backups to keep as 1. Now, the reason I do that is I don't want all my server space being taken up by backups that just keep piling up for one reason or another. So I will allow the site to store 1 local backup. It'll be the most recent local backup that maybe if for some reason it didn't get sent over to the remote destination for some reason or whatever, that will sometimes happen. I just don't want a bunch of backups piling up on top of each other. So I will typically allow 1 local backup to sit here, and that's it. That is all of the settings that you have to do. Brian is asking, can Stash Live and normal backup have different destinations? So Brian, Stash Live is a destination, and it's of its own. So it is not a remote destination within Backup Buddy specifically. It is its own little service, and it is off there by itself. But there's a difference between Stash and Stash Live. Does that help? There's a difference between Stash and Stash Live. Fiona's asking about backups and multi-site. I believe Backup Buddy works in certain cases on multi-site, but it is not a feature that we support officially. Okay, so there you go. We're at the top of the hour here. I'll do just a brief overview. You want to set up the site in iThemes Sync once you're all done here. Let me just get that over here. I've got my Sync dashboard logged in, and I'm just going to cover real quick a couple of the features in iThemes Sync. Then we need to take a break. Kai, real quick, the difference between Stash and Stash Live. Stash Live is the service within Backup Buddy that does live backups of the site. Stash is a remote destination that you can send backups to if you set up those backup schedules or do manual backups. Stephanie, does that help as well? Stash Live is a service within Backup Buddy that takes live backups. It just keeps running all the time. Stash itself is a remote destination that you can send backups to when you run them either as a schedule or manually. So the offer here, Stash Live uses your stash storage space, but it is a service within Backup Buddy. It's included with Backup Buddy, but it uses the storage space that you have allocated in your iThemes Stash account. Great questions, everybody. And I agree that can definitely be confusing. But hopefully that clears things up. Does that help? All right, I've given you some things here. Basically, what I'm going to do is just real quick attach this site to iThemes Sync. There it is. I'm going to activate the Sync plugin. Now, I noticed that earlier, this wpnathan.com is a site that I use for 8 million demos on various iThemes webinars. And for some reason, in my iThemes Sync settings, I've got like this old user. I don't know why. You won't see this. This is some sort of database, a vestige that's out there from some webinar we did a million years ago. And I've just got to get that cleared up. But you're going to see this, add a user, and I'm going to log in right here. I activated the iThemes Sync plugin. I went to Settings and iThemes Sync, and I'm going to just sign in with my iThemes username and password, and that's all I have to do. Once I do that, I can now refresh my iThemes Sync dashboard at sync.ithemes.com, and there's my site right there. Boom. Nifty, right? Super easy to do. I don't have any updates. If I do have updates, let me just show you what that looks like. I've got a cool plugin on here called WP Rollback that will allow me to roll back a plugin to a previous version right here in the dashboard. So I'm just going to, let's just do the user switching plugin because it's quick and simple. I'm going to roll it back a couple of versions. So now I have a plugin that needs an update. All right, so right there it is. So rather than having to log into every single WordPress site that I now manage, I will see updates for all of my sites. All right, so now there it is. There is a plugin that needs an update. Now, what I'll usually do is go over here to All Updates. So I'm looking at all my sites. I can see all the plugins that are going to need updating. They're going to be in a list here. And I sort of have a little a checklist for my business of plugins that have been trouble in the past. And sometimes I'll update those manually. But otherwise, if it's plugins that we know and use and they don't typically have problems, we'll just go ahead and update all the plugins at once. And I'll just hit Update Selected right here. And right there. Obviously, you want to make sure you have a good backup of all your sites prior to doing this. But updating right here through the iThemes Sync dashboard, we will find that the user switching plugin is now up to date right here in our WordPress install. Super easy to do and great to manage multiple sites. That's what it's designed for. Now, as you add a site into iThemes Sync, you probably want to add uptime to it. That way, you'll get a notice if the site goes down. So we've got uptime set up. You can set groups by tagging sites. Maybe it's WooCommerce sites or sites of a various theme or one thing or another. You can tag sites. You can see those together and filter them by various things. You can, if you have a bunch of sites here, you can search just by domain name and so forth. It's real easy to do all that. A couple of other things here, going into the settings for the particular site. You get a nice little overview of what's going on in the site. It takes a minute to populate that data in here. Still loading. Once it's in here, it goes a little quicker the next time. We just added this. You can hide sync from the user if you want to do that. That's kind of a nice feature to do. A few other things that I'll mention that are helpful. Hiding menus from the client. So maybe the client is an editor, but you don't want them to see some of the things that editors have access to. We can go right here. I'm going into users of WP Nathan. I've got this user called editor that is an editor role. And we can edit that user. And not only can you change their password and all of those things from right here in iThemes Sync, you can also turn on the client dashboard for that particular user. Takes just a second to load the first time. But once it comes up, it's going to allow you to go in and determine which menu items show for the client. So, for example, if I want to turn off certain dashboard widgets for the client, I can do that. Anything that is checked is visible. So if I want to turn off these WordPress widgets for that particular user, I can do that and they won't show. If I want to turn off the user's ability to access anything under appearance, I can do that. I can turn off plugins. I can turn off tools and settings and backup buddy and security. If I don't want this user to edit pages, I can do that. Let's save that. And let me activate user switching. And you'll see that when I switch over to that user, Look at that. Look at how clean their menu is. All of those things are done. Nifty, right? Okay, a few other things I want to show you here. And the question from Lydia in the chat about sync reports, I'm going to breeze through that really quick. I would suggest that you look at the iThemes Help Center under iThemes Sync. I gave you that link right up here. They've got some great documentation and videos on that. What you're going to want to do right here under, there's Analytics and Search Console. You're going to need to connect. Actually, I did that already. You just connect and allow the iThemes to access your Google account just like you would a Google Analytics plugin, for example. And see right there, I've got starting to see some Google Analytics here as well as Search Console. And once those are connected in this spot, you have the ability to include that data in the report for the client. So let's go under, let's see here. Here under white labeling, you can put in your company logo and name and contact information, and you can edit what the report email looks like. So this is super awesome. Because a lot of times, how do I validate to the client? We're going to talk about this in the next section. We're about to take a break. But, how do I validate to the client that I'm actually doing work on their website? Wouldn't it be great if Sync just kept a list of everything you've done? I'll update this many plugins and this many themes and this many core and all of that. Well, it does that. And you can set up an email to automatically generate to the client on a certain interval. So I can show my logo, maybe not the company name. Let's bring that logo width down to here-ish. We can do some tweaking of the styling and so forth. You can put a default message that goes here. And then on each, and a footer text, which goes here. Brand it to your colors. And then on each email that goes out to the clients, you can actually add additional information too if you'd like to. But once this is done, you can then set up under reports a report schedule, and it'll automatically send to the client. So pretty nifty. And again, this is something that could be part of your basic care plan that you provide for clients. It's set it and forget it. It's going to send the clients the emails automatically to show them, hey, this month we updated 58 plugins on your site, blah, blah, blah. It's really helpful to validate that you're doing great work. One more thing I'll mention before we quit. I typically update themes and plugins on a weekly basis at the same time each week. I usually do it on Sunday nights, which is a low traffic time. The reason I do this is for the sites where I have file change notifications enabled. If I get an email that says file change notification and the file changes on a Sunday night, I know that's probably me doing plugin updates, and I don't worry about that. If I get file change notifications at any other time, because I don't typically update plugins at all during any other time of the week, then it's something for me to pay attention to. Does that make sense? I know a lot, if you're going through and updating things on a regular basis, the file change can be overwhelming. But by doing your updates at the same time and being consistent, it makes those file changes a lot easier to deal with. I'll also wait for a couple of weeks after major core releases and major large plugin, major version releases before I run an update. And also just watch WordPress security news. Michael publishes a twice monthly WordPress security roundup on the iThemes blog that is wonderful. And every month I do a WordPress news roundup where I talk about a lot of these things as well. Shane is asking, is it okay to make monthly updates? I mean, you can, but honestly, I would do it weekly because there are, sometimes there are exploits that happen. And if one just happened and you don't update that site for a month, it's sitting out there with the door unlocked. So I typically do it on a weekly basis. And I'm also watching WordPress security news for any of those plugins that I use that have an exploit that I may not otherwise know about and run those updates on a regular basis. That's my process. You can do whatever you want. Steven is saying, how do you determine when to update WordPress to ensure plugin compatibility? That's kind of tough. That can be an issue. And that's why you should, only use plugins from trusted authors, plugins that you can, and rely on. And if you need advice about that, ask others, look at reviews and so forth. You don't want to put a janky plugin on your site that, is supported by some person you don't know anything about. But that's a long discussion. And I've got to end this session now. so that we can actually have time to get into selling these services to clients, which is super important. So I tell you what, I'm just going to press on. I'm going to press on and without a break, and we'll just continue on into the second hour. That makes everybody okay with that? Otherwise, I don't want to cheat you guys out of any time because I've got some really good stuff to cover in this next session. So here is day 3, session 2 handout. And we're just going to press forward into that one. I need to get it open for me, though. Just one second. So you've learned about WordPress security. You have learned about how to set up the very excellent iThemes plugins, which can do everything you need to put a care plan in place. Now let's talk about how to package and price your services and talk to clients about WordPress security. How many of you have trouble talking to clients about WordPress security and selling care plans to clients? Let me hear from you. Give me a yeah in the chat room. If you're just joining us, ithemes.com/chat. Yeah, how do you convince a client they need to pay you on a monthly basis? That is what we're going to talk about. Now, by the way, here's the thing. iThemes has built its suite of products and services to empower you as a freelancer, micro agency, whatever you are, to empower you with the tools you need to manage WordPress sites for clients and make money doing it. That is what's so awesome about iThemes. That's why I love being in partnership with iThemes. I'm the host here at iThemes Training, but I use iThemes products and have for years in doing these exact things for clients. And honestly, for the last several years, I've been paying my salary only from WordPress care plans. So if I don't sell a website this month, it doesn't matter because my salary is covered from WordPress care plans. And that's a great place to be as far as the financial side of your business. Now, let me get on a small soapbox here and why this subject is so important. If you've been around me at all, you've heard me speak here or in person at some live event or wherever, you may have heard me say something like recurring income is the foundation of a successful freelance business. You could scratch out freelance and say business. Without recurring revenue, it is virtually impossible to survive for the long term in a WordPress business. If you're trying to build sites for clients and you are only building sites and you're not doing care plans or some other recurring revenue strategy, you will not last in this business. I say that because I've watched it happen for 25 years. You'll last for a little while, but pretty soon selling websites gets really tiring. It's really tiring and you will burn out. You just will. I've seen it happen over and over again. I don't know anybody who has lasted in the site building world doing WordPress for clients. I don't know anybody that's lasted long term without a recurring revenue strategy. So, I'm going to skip through this. You can read this if you like. Selling a WordPress care plan is a starting point. Here's why. The reason, and by the way, I'm going to use care plan and security in this hour interchangeably, providing security services, providing care plans. I'm talking about the same thing, and I may tend to slip in and out of that language, but I'm talking about the same thing. We're selling to clients what we just talked about setting up with iThemes Sync, iThemes Security, Backup Buddy, and so forth. If you're building a site for the client, that site needs to live somewhere. So you ought to be providing hosting services. I mean, and I don't mean setting up a server in your house. I mean using iThemes hosting. We have multiple site plans now that allow you to pile on client sites into a single plan that you offer. And it's hosting that's built for iThemes. It's hosting that is built by iThemes for WordPress websites. Yeah, Jim, if your clients are coming from a lot of hosting companies, which one should we encourage them to get off of? I'm not going to give you a list of hosts that I don't recommend. That would be in poor form. What I will tell you is iThemes hosting works really, really well for a basic WordPress website. It is better than shared hosting. So for your basic brochure sites, which is what a lot of us build, it is wonderful. Even for some more advanced sites, it works really well. If you have a fairly robust e-commerce site, look at a VPS or managed WordPress hosting with Liquid Web. I have a server with Liquid Web, and I'm thoroughly pleased. So, You're building the site, you might as well sell them the care plan. They need this anyway. They need it. You've built the client relationship. Maximize that relationship for the long term, not just for a single project. Build it and get paid, and that's it. Every WordPress website needs ongoing care. Would you agree that based on what you've learned for the last 2.5 days, every single WordPress website has to have care for the long term? Would you agree to that? If you agree to that, then why in the world don't you provide that as a service for your clients? You got to do it. Okay. The challenge is explaining that to clients. It can be a challenge to explain to clients why a care plan is important, because often clients are not very tech savvy. They don't understand the challenges or the benefits. So it's up to us to teach the client, and even a non-technical client, why it's important. And we need to do it in terms and in language that they understand. So I'm going to give you some language, and you are free to use this as you see fit. 2 common mistakes. 2 common mistakes I see as people begin to talk to clients about WordPress security. First, they present security as an option. Oh, if you want this, we provide it. No, it's not that they need it. It's not if they want it or not, because they're never going to want it. They need it. WordPress security is not an option. It's a necessity. If the client wants their website to stay healthy, it is a necessity. A care plan is not like an optional extended care warranty that a car dealership likes to sell. It's not like that. And don't present it like that. If you got to change your mindset like that. It's not an option, it's a must. A care plan is not an extended warranty, it's like regularly scheduled maintenance. If you want to fit into the car analogy, a care plan is not an extended warranty. It is like oil changes, tire pressure checks. If you skip those things, the car is going to have problems. It just will. Does that make sense? Now, here's a line that I use regularly. If a client is budget challenged, and we all know who those are, and we have those, right? When you're dealing with a budget challenged client, I would rather see the client spend less money on the project so they have enough money to purchase a care plan. I'd rather see a client roll certain features of the project into a phase 2 so they have enough budget this year to purchase a care plan and keep the site that they can afford to build healthy. Does that make sense to everybody? You got to start thinking that way. It's more important to have a care plan than it is to have certain features in a site that are going to max the client's budget out. Spend the budget on the care plan. It is that important. What good is a site if it stops working? So that's the first mistake I see clients make. Presenting security as an option. The second mistake I see people make in explaining security is waiting until launch. If you present your care plan as an, oh, by the way, right when you get ready to launch the site, you'll never sell it and you'll tick the client off. You're going to anger the client. The client is going to feel scammed because you've told them the site costs this much money. And oh, by the way, you need to pay me $100 a month, $50 a month to keep it safe now that it's about to launch. That is never going to work. I tried it. It doesn't work. If you wait until launch before you introduce the client to the concept of a care plan, you will rarely sell the care plan. The key to care plans is education, and you start that education at the first conversation with the client. Part of the strategy I use in dealing with clients in the first conversation when we're talking about the scope of the website is I introduce them in that conversation to the concept of website management if they don't understand it already. And in the proposal, they're going to get the price for the care plan and the price for the build. They're going to know about it from the very first conversation. It has to be in their thinking about how much this website is going to cost. It's not just a build cost, it's a maintain cost. So talk about it first. It should be in your proposal. It's just as important as the cost of the initial build. Does that make sense? For those of you looking for the handout for this session, just a minute. Here is that link. For those of you watching on the replay, you should see this in the notes underneath the video. Link to download this here document. Okay. Here is how I present a care plan to the client. This is so easy, anybody can do it. I call it the 4 walls. I will frequently, just because it's fun to do and it makes it a more it's a more fun conversation. I will either take out a piece of paper or if we're meeting at a Starbucks, I'll pull a napkin and I will draw on the napkin this very diagram. I put a W with a circle on it in the middle. This is your WordPress site. And I draw a box around it. Your WordPress site needs 4 walls of protection. And then I begin to explain why each wall is important and what we do in a care plan to provide this wall. The acronym that you can use to remember this is HUBS, H-U-B-S, hosting, updates, backups, and security. 4 walls of protection: hosting, updates, backups, and security. So I draw out this diagram and then I go into each one. Now, I don't spend a lot of time on any single wall unless the client has questions or doesn't understand why it's important. A lot of times the client just needs to know we do this and that's enough. So, hosting. Hosting is critical. The client may or may not be familiar with $5 a month shared hosting. They may not know. Maybe they've got a site on some El Cheapo host and they're paying $5 a month now. And when you start talking about, wow, it's going to cost $50, $80, $100, $150, $200 a month, whatever it's going to be for your care plan, they may freak out about that. If they do, here's what I talk about. Again, a car analogy. Sure, there is cheap $5 a month low quality hosting, but it's like, sure, you can buy a car for $100 on Craigslist, but what's that actually going to get you? It might work for a little while, but I'm not going to put my family in a $100 car that I buy off Craigslist. Shared hosting is cheap because there are literally thousands of other websites on the same server as yours, which means you can't control speed, you can't control security, you can't control your neighbors. It's like living in an apartment building when you have no control over who your neighbors are. There might be a meth lab next door and there's no way to know it. In the analogy, there could be a site on that shared server along with thousands of others that is doing something bad or gets hacked and starts doing malicious things, and your server IP address gets blacklisted and you have no control over that. And now your site gets affected. It's just a bad situation. So, there's some explanation that's there. If the client's if they're not familiar with it, don't worry about it. You can say, hey, we provide hosting that is optimized for WordPress. Your site is going to be safe and secure. That may be all it takes. But if they are familiar, otherwise it doesn't matter. I'll say something like, not only does our private server provide much better security for your website, it's also significantly faster than other alternatives, and Google likes faster sites. So a lot of clients don't care about that. You just have to make that decision. That's where you need to resist the urge to explain everything if you're a detail person and listen to the client and see what his or her concerns are. When I'm dealing with a business owner who I can sense has no problem with spending money on value, I simply say, look, we have our own private server. We control it. Only has our clients' websites, and we are one neck to strangle when it comes to anything about your website. If you have any problems with your website, we control everything, the hosting, the website, everything. For my ideal client, that's exactly what they want to hear. They don't care about the details. They just want to know there's a provider out there that they can trust that's just going to handle it. Basically, what you got to remember is the client just wants to trust somebody. And hopefully that is you. Henry is asking, he says, I'm a security professional, but what if we don't feel like a security guru? How do we guarantee and charge for something we're not 100% professionals? So that's a great question. Henry, 2 things. It's not hard to learn about the WordPress security. And if you implement the iTheme security plugin, the other things we're talking about, and follow the strategies that I've shown you, you're doing a good job. You've got it together. But if you're going to be in the tech space, then there's some, you need to just stay up to date on the news and things of what's going on in WordPress security news and so forth. But you don't have to learn a lot to provide this for clients. All right, let's move on to the second wall, which is WordPress Backups. And Michael is dropping some great links in the chat about some security related things. Yeah, you can educate yourself really well with iTheme's resources. So let's move to backups, the second wall. Most clients are going to understand why backups are important. Oh, I back up your site. That's good. Backups are good. That's what is in most clients' head already. So there's two reasons that we provide backup services. Again, I'll go into this if the client seems interested. If they don't, don't belabor the point if your client's not really interested. This is a sales situation. So we provide backup services for two main reasons. To mitigate the damage done by hackers. Look, if your website gets compromised by a hack, we can immediately restore a backup to pre-hacked condition. And we'll talk about hackers a little bit below. Also, to protect against human error. So just in case you or one of your employees accidentally deletes or damages the website, we can restore a backup that's no more than 24 hours old. That's good. So this is why we do it. Simple reasons. I explained that I, at least, am relentless about backups. For every website, there's at least a two-tiered backup strategy. First, we have backups at our server level. So in addition to the backup buddy process I explained to you folks, I have a server level backup that happens every night with archives stored for I think it's 5 days, weekly for a month, and then monthly for a quarter. And it's full server backup. So I've got all those server backups out there as well. So I explain that to the client. If they're interested, again, some clients don't care about this, so I'm not going to belabor the point. We have backups at the server level. That's the first line of defense. Second, we have a backup of each individual website daily for 30 days. It's often cloud storage. If something happens to the web host, we can pull a backup. It's there. The important thing is the client understands that you have a working strategy to keep the website backed up and safe. Too many details at this point can muddy the waters. Again, you just have to play it by ear with the client and figure out what's important to the client. Use your best judgment. Does that make sense to everybody? Third wall is WordPress updates. This one can be a little more difficult to explain. So in my opinion, my experience, there's two kinds of clients that I've found who push back on the importance of WordPress theme and plugin updates. First of all, there are non-technical clients who they don't get it. They don't understand why you'd have to do this to begin with. Why in the world do you have to keep the website up to date? And then there's semi-technical clients who maybe they've used WordPress before and they're like, well, I can just go in and hit update. Okay, and that's true in a lot of cases, but how many of you have ever gone in and hit update and something bad happened? Me. I've done it. So, yeah. The best analogy I use is to relate WordPress updates to software updates on your computer. So, for non-technical clients, why do you have to update WordPress? Well, it's like software on your computer. The developer has found problems or security vulnerabilities, so a patch was released to fix that. Clients will typically understand that. They get those Adobe updates or those Windows updates or Mac updates or whatever. So relate it to those things. If you don't keep your computer up to date, you could get malware or ransomware or bad things could happen. WordPress updates are like those, except you're dealing with your computer sitting there on your desk. Your website is out there on the internet. So it's out there potentially more accessible than your particular computer. That means that hackers can and will snoop around looking for problems, checking for open doors and windows. So Paul is saying, yeah, but my old HTML site didn't need to be updated. That's always fun. You're exactly right. And that's just a conversation about the evolution of the internet and technology. Sure, you can have an HTML website, but probably looks like not really great on a mobile device. You can't do a lot of things with an HTML site that you can do with WordPress, et cetera, particularly if they want to log in to update the website themselves. Here's the other things. Those semi-technical clients who think it's just as simple as pushing a button, and for those business clients that think, oh, well, I could just get somebody on my staff to do the updates. Here's the way to talk about that. We update your WordPress site each week under normal circumstances. It's on our schedule. We do it. We make sure it happens. It's our job. Do you really have an employee who you can trust 100% to go in and on a weekly basis and make sure the website stays up to date? Do you trust them to look for problem plugins that might be an issue if the website updates? Are they going to stay abreast of WordPress security news to know when they need to update maybe more frequently? The answer to that is no. Are you really going to trust your executive assistant to do this? Oh, well, I have an IT department. Most clients don't. But even if they say they do have an IT department, IT and web security are two separate disciplines. Your IT person may be great at setting up email on your laptop or your phone, but they likely don't know anything about website security. So, helping a good business owner who understands the value of, you know what, for $100 a month, I can just offload this critical function to somebody else that's a pro in that area. It's a no-brainer for most people. Most good clients that understand business are going to say no problem. Steven's saying, I've had people who say, I've never updated before. Why should I worry about this? And basically, I tell the story of hackers have bots that are scanning the internet. They're looking for WordPress sites to exploit. And when they find yours, there's already a list of WordPress core exploits. And if they find your WordPress version that's out of date, they will exploit your website. And if you haven't been exploited yet, it's only a matter of time before it happens. If they say, I've been out for a year and I've never updated, my response is, well, you are due then. You are due. And again, if the client is not willing to pay for WordPress care plans, they're probably not my ideal client anyway, because they really don't value their website. It's a huge red flag if the client pushes back on a care plan, at least in my world. If the client pushes back on a care plan, it says they are not really invested in their website. It's like a client buying a brand new car and saying, I'm never going to change the oil. That'll work for 10,000 miles, maybe 20, but try to run the same car on 30,000 miles of the same oil and you're going to gum up the engine. Bad things happen. Goal here is for the client to understand that you have their back and they don't have to be a web security expert. Let's move on to website security, the next wall. It's a three-phase approach when it comes to architecture. So when I talk to the client about website security, the way your site is built is important. We only choose the best WordPress themes and plugins and only use reliable code to build your website. So when you trust us to build your website, the architecture is in place from the beginning. We're using quality code to start off with. At the launch, we perform a 39-point WordPress security lockdown. Doesn't that sound great? Guess where that comes from? The 39 points are individual features in iThemes Security Pro that we enable during launch. How about that? I mean, you count the features you use, and that's what you can say. We perform a 32-point WordPress security lockdown. It's great marketing language. Basically means you're going in and hardening WordPress with those settings, but it's still, you are doing a 39-point WordPress security lockdown. Again, that number might change, but as features are added or we change up the way we do iThemes security, we might change that language. Monitoring. Also, we monitor your website for hack attempts and perform regular malware scans to ensure your site is clean. Again, that's something that iThemes security does. All the lockouts, the regular malware scans, all those are provided in iThemes Security Pro. Christine is asking, what if a site is on an iThemes template but it's old and aging out? How do you approach a change? What do you call it? Yeah, Christine, time for an upgrade. You need to upgrade your website to a new, better theme. Tell the client, think how much things have changed in the last 3 or 4 years since we built your website. Again, that's part of education, and as part of the initial onboarding experience with the client, we're going to talk about the average lifespan of a website being about 2 years. Something else in regard to, as we're talking about security, under our care plan, we're going to give you a free SSL certificate. Hopefully your host provides that. iThemes Hosting does. That way, all communication is encrypted. Your website has the padlock, not green anymore in most cases. It's going to help your Google ranking and so forth. Stacy is exactly right in the chat. Server security is critical. A lot of those El Cheapo shared hosts do not have great security. Just looked at a rescue client the other day that was on a very, I'll just say, not going to call names, but a very well-known, very large brand in the WordPress space host that provides low-quality hosting. That website was running PHP 5.6, which is a version of PHP that was end of life a long time ago, has known exploits that will not be patched, and yeah. Christine, iThemes Hosting is not a shared server per se. It's a completely different architecture than a typical shared host. It's kind of it sits in the middle. It's a better than shared host. And maybe Michael can explain that a little bit more in the chat. But it's completely different architecture than a typical hosting environment. Okie dokie. All right. So a lot of clients will not understand why a hacker wants to access their website to begin with. This could be a little rabbit trail of discussion you get into. Well, why would a hacker want to hack my site anyway? I'm just an accountant here in the small town, right? Or, I'm just a construction company. Why would a hacker care about my website? Well, here's how I address that. So a lot of clients might take a so what approach. So what if a hacker exploits my website? There's nothing on there for them to gain. I'm not taking credit cards, blah, blah, blah. So here's what I explain. I tell a story. Telling a story is good. We live in a very safe neighborhood. I live in Birmingham, Alabama, just south of Birmingham. Nice little suburb here, very safe. Our neighborhood is pretty large, very safe. But last year, we had a string of break-ins. I've lived here, for, 15, almost 16 years now. Never had anything like this happen before, but had a string of break-ins. Vehicles sitting in people's driveways. They would find valuables taken out of their cars when they went out in the morning. No cars were damaged, but things were stolen. Somebody left their purse there, or a phone, or a tablet on the seat, and things were taken. And it turns out several teenagers were walking around in the middle of the night, driveway to driveway, just checking door handles. If a car was unlocked, they would just go through the car and see if there's anything, they could find that was worth taking. That is what hackers do, essentially. Hackers are walking around your website, checking doors and windows to see if anything is open. The doors and windows they're checking are known vulnerabilities with code. But the difference is, it's not like you see in the movies where there's one hacker sitting in a dark room in front of a screen glowing into his or her face. It's all automated. They have software that's scanning the web, checking thousands of websites every hour, tens of thousands every hour, looking for known code vulnerabilities, looking for those open doors and windows. It would be like in our story, the hacker is like pressing a button and automatically checking all the doors and windows in the neighborhood at once. That's what they do. So when you think of a hacker, by the way, don't think of some person in their parents' basement late at night, with Cheeto dust on their fingers. That's not a hacker. Hackers are creating these little bots, these little programs that scan the internet looking for website vulnerabilities. When they find an open door, those little bots are automatically programmed to infect the website and report back to the hacker with success, and they'll have all the vulnerabilities they want to exploit. Does that make sense? A hacker, they're not after you, they're just after your website. Why do they hack? The question from the client is often, why would they do this? What is it? What is the value of my little site to them? So that's typically a question that I'll get. So the answer is the hacker isn't after you. You're just one of a million sites they're trying to exploit. So what do they gain from exploiting your site? Here's the issue. 4 things. A hacker, first of all, can get access to your server resources. If they compromise your website, they can use the horsepower of your server to start running complex calculations like creating digital currency like Bitcoin. They can use the server processor to start creating Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency. They can use the server's resources to perform other kinds of tasks anonymously. They just want the server resources. They don't care about your website in this scenario. They just want your server resources. The server can also be harnessed to send millions of spam emails. And you tell the people, hey, how many times have you gotten a spam email? Well, guess what? That spam email was likely sent from a compromised website just like yours could be. They're just using the server resources to churn out spam emails. In a worse situation, they might inject content onto your website. Hackers can add text and image links to products and sites that you don't want to advertise. Think pornography or male pharmaceuticals, and I'll leave it at that. I've had a client that had a furniture business, And they went to their website one Monday morning, and because one of their clients their customer said, "Hey, when I go to your website, there's a great big ad for Viagra right on the homepage." This is not what we want, right? That actually happened to a church that a friend of mine supported. Go to the church, there's a great big ad for Viagra right on the homepage. Again, not the ideal situation. But this malware was clever because it recognized that the user was logged in. So when the owner of the furniture store went to their website, they didn't see the defacement because it was hidden from them because they were logged in. But when you logged out, you could see it. Sometimes the malware will happen only if they find the site as a result of a Google search. So if the referrer is Google, then the malware shows up. But if you go directly to the website, like most website owners and managers would, then it doesn't show up. So it's really tricky. They're doing these things. They're injecting content onto your site for backlinks or for advertisements or that sort of thing. Worst case scenario is they're actually putting malware on the site. So maybe they're putting hijacked images or hijacked code, where simply by viewing the website, if the user, the website visitor, is running an old, outdated web browser or operating system or whatever, then the website can actually execute code on that user's browser, and nasty things can happen. Like they can install keyloggers on the user's computer and put malware and ransomware on the user's computer. That's bad, bad stuff. And the trick is, guess what? You might have there may be legal implications for that. If you don't have a good terms of use policy and so forth on your website, you could be held liable for infecting a user's computer with malware and any ensuing damage. I'm not a lawyer, but that sort of thing can happen. Scary stuff, right? So the good news, clients, especially non-technical ones, might be scared to death at this point. And you don't want to use fear as a tactic, but honestly, when you provide a care plan, you are trying to alleviate the client's fear and worry and provide trust instead, and that's what you can do. You can assure, hey, WordPress is quite secure when good security strategies employed, like the one you're offering as part of your care plan. And what I tell them is, and you may or may not ever be able to say this, but in 25 years of working with client websites, I have never had a website infected when it was managed under the care plan that I offer. The only time we've had websites infected is when the client chose, and they were in a care plan, the client chose to let a license expire on a premium plugin, and that plugin got exploited. And by the way, that is something that is disclaimed in our care plan terms of service. So there you go. I don't see any questions in the chat particularly related to that, so I'm going to press on. Also important to explain to the client that they do have some responsibilities in security. This is something that's in my contract. It's detailed in my master services agreement. If you want information about that, you can look at that link right there. It's important for clients to understand that they actually still do have responsibility in keeping their website secure. So this is some stuff that is in, maybe should be part of your contract. The client needs to agree to install and maintain security software on every computer that is going to log into the website with any sort of editing capability. They're going to agree to use the most up-to-date version of your preferred web browser. By the way, hey, don't know if you guys saw this, but yesterday there was a 0-day exploit in Chrome. If you haven't updated your Chrome to the latest version, you need to do that. Oftentimes Chrome updates automatically, but go to the About section of Chrome and just make sure you're running the latest. For those of you asking for a boilerplate contract, you can check out myfriendlymonster.com. Let's see. I don't want to belabor that, but there's some good resources for you there. So the client will agree to maintain security software, keep the web browser up to date, keep their operating system patched, and if they're running Flash or Java for some reason on their computer, those things are up to date because those are frequently exploited. Also, the client must agree to use a strong password as shown by the WordPress password indicator for any account used to log in and edit the website. The password must only be used on the website, not elsewhere. Recommend a password manager like LastPass, Dashlane, 1Password, or any of the others. If the If the client has, quote unquote, their password that they use on lots of different sites, we need to stop and talk about that. How many of you have that situation? I use my password on my site, my password. That's maybe it's some random whatever, or some word that has vowels replaced with various numbers or whatever. Yeah, that's your password. But if one site that password is used on gets exploited, now the hacker can access all the other sites you use that username and password for. So have them go to haveibeenpawned.com, which is a wonderful resource. By the way, if you're not signed up on this site, you ought to be. Put your email addresses in there, and they will let you know if you have been pawned by a hack. So, by the way, iTheme security includes that Have I Been Pawned protection. We talked about that in the last hour. So they need to agree to keep their own self secure on their end. You can't control that, and you may or may not want to have language in your contract that talks about this. So, when you explain the importance of a care plan, I give the client 3 options. And you know what? You can't force the client to do anything. You can't. So these are 3 legitimate options that you can offer to the client. And I saw earlier, somebody said something about, hey, what do I do if I'm not charging anything and I want to? This is a good approach for you as well. I can't remember who that was, but likely on a call with this many participants, some of you are doing WordPress updates and stuff and you're not charging for it. So how do I go back retroactively and start charging the people I'm not charging for? So at some point you have to communicate to the clients what you're doing and why it's important. Again, it starts with education. I'm updating your site once a week, once a month, whatever. I can't keep doing this anymore at no cost. So as of a certain date, I'm going to need you to do one of 3 things. Number 1, do nothing. And again, these are the 3 options I explained to the client also when it comes to a care plan for their website in general. You don't have to take one. You can do nothing about any of the security and stuff. It's a bad option, but it is an option. You will get hacked at some point, or your website will break. It's going to happen. It's like driving a car without changing the oil. Eventually, the engine is going to break. It's just going to happen. But you can do nothing. That is an option. Option number 2 is you can do it yourself. We will teach you how to keep your website updated. We will give you a handbook on how to update your website, and I'll do that for them. I have a handbook that has a step-by-step on how to keep the website updated, everything they need to look for, places to watch for security news, all those things. Here's the beautiful thing of this. Number 1, I'm going to charge them for the time in the proposal to train them how to do security updates, right? So you're going to make some money on the front end. Number 2, almost always when I've given the client the manual to keep the website updated, they've said, oh my gosh, that's too much work. I'll just pay you to do it. So option 2 is a great little place to start. Does that make sense to everybody? Or, hey, for $100 a month, we offer a suite of ongoing services designed to keep your website safe and working properly. Let the people who designed your site maintain your site, and we're going to keep it healthy for its lifetime. It's only $100 a month, and you don't have to worry about it. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions about this piece? Christine is saying, so if they decide to do it themselves, would they have to buy their own license for Security Pro, Backup Buddy, Sync, etc.? That's up to you, Christine. You may, if you have a unlimited license to those things, you might want to let them do that and keep your license on there. That's up to you. Or you could have them go buy it themselves and, set up an iThemes affiliate link. Tommy is asking, if your client is doing updates and security themselves, do you keep them on a different server than sites you weekly update? Okay, it's a great question. So if I do not allow on my server any websites that I do not maintain. That's just a choice that I've made for my business. If the client insists on doing their own updates, I'm going to put them on an iThemes hosting account or, on some other VPS somewhere, but they're not going to be on my site. Paul, the security manual that I just mentioned is not something I can share at this point. Maybe sometime in the future. However, you can look at all the great resources iThemes puts together on security and put together some really good information on your own. John, is hosting part of the care package? Absolutely. The care plan is the 4 walls that I explained up here somewhere. There it is. Hosting, updates, backups, and security. So, by the way, what do I do with a client who doesn't want hosting? Maybe for a good reason they have their own hosting. I don't lower the price of the care plan any. If anything, I will raise the price of the care plan because a client who brings their own hosting will typically cause me to change my normal process to deal with idiosyncrasies of their own hosting platform. Michael is asking, do I include email for clients? This is the point where I might interject a curse word. Heck no. Okay? No way. So, I realized years ago that well over half of the support tickets I was getting had to do with email. And I wasn't charging any more for email. So one of the best changes I made early on in my business was stop providing email support for clients. And here's the way that I position that with a client. Now, you and I, as web professionals, know that in a hosting platform, you can set up email. We also know that the email that like a cPanel web host provides or whatever, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's hard to keep in sync. It's hard to set up correctly. The spam protection is awful. And so it's just not a great solution. So this is the language and you are free to use this language if you want to. Here's what I tell clients. Email is an IT issue, and I don't provide IT support for clients. Here's a few local IT companies you might want to consider. By the way, maybe you should partner with an IT person as a web developer. They're a great source for reciprocal referrals. Here's an IT professional that can work you. We recommend Google's G Suite or Office 365. Liquid Web Managed Business Email is also really good, by the way. It's cheaper than both of those 2 options from Office and Google. So there's other options, but email is an IT issue. It's not a website issue. So we do not provide or support email for clients. Does that make sense? So Christine is asking about a webinar on setting up Google. Yeah, it's DNS records. They have video on their own site about instructions on how to do that. But that's something we could certainly look into. Okie dokie. That makes sense, everybody? Email is a flippin' nightmare. Did I miss any other questions that just came in? Let's see. One other thing that I'll add is this. One of the questions I'll ask in the first conversation with the client is, who will be responsible for managing your website after it launches? That introduces the concept of somebody has to, and do they think they can or do they want me to? It's a great lead into the conversation. Who will be responsible for managing your website after it launches? And based on their answer to that, we can have the conversation about all of this. If the client does not want a care plan, 9 times out of 10, they are not my ideal client. That's just something I've learned over the years. If they're too cheap to buy a care plan, I don't want to deal with them at all because they're just going to be a nightmare to work with on other areas. Because the cheapskate factor does not go away throughout the project. They're going to try to scope creep without price creep. I've just learned over the years that it's a big red flag if the client doesn't want a care plan. My ideal client is a small business, nonprofit professional they just want to offload the web issues to somebody else. They want somebody they can trust to take care of the website. And so that's what we do. So take that for what it's worth. Any other questions on the stuff that we've talked about so far? We've given our clients options. Did I miss any questions? That we got one more little section here we'll end up with. Okay, let's talk about pricing the care plan. This is where we will end up today. Figuring out pricing is one of the hardest parts of this because care plan prices vary wildly. It can depend on the area of your country you're in. It can depend on just lots of different things. But the one general factor that sets the price point The price of your care plans depends on the price of your websites. You cannot charge $100 a month for a care plan if you're selling a $1,500 website. You can't do it. So, these are, with as many caveats as I can give you, guidelines, suggestions, starting points, just a place to start thinking about where pricing ought to land. There's lots of factors that could tweak this up or down depending on where you are. If your typical website price is under $2,000, you probably ought to be around $47 a month. If you're charging in this ballpark, maybe $67 a month and up. If you're $3,500 or up, $100 a month and up can work. So that's at least a starting point. Hopefully that's helpful. And again, that's charging for hosting, updates, backups, and security in the scenario that I just painted for you. All right, I've got about 5 minutes left. Questions. I am here for the next several minutes, and I will be as helpful as possible. Oh, Stacy, thank you. Charge more for e-commerce. So, I said starting point. I should have emphasized that more because this will be for a basic website, what I would call a quote-unquote brochure website. It's a simple website, doesn't have a lot of functionality. Maybe it has a contact form. That's about it. Basic website. When you start getting into any advanced features, the kinds of features that drive up the website price, the cost of your care plan should increase at the same rate. So, an e-commerce site might be $150, $200 a month, $250 a month, depending on what level of support you have to provide. For example, is the e-commerce site so critical that after any update of the site, do you need to go in and run purchase transaction testing? Well, I'm not going to do that for $100 a month. It's going to have to be $250, $300 a month to do that, right? So Paul is asking, and that's what I didn't want to get caught on. But yeah, I don't know that there's necessarily a percentage like, one raises at a certain percent versus the other. You just need to be aware that if the website is more expensive and therefore more complex, then the care plan should also be more expensive to accommodate that additional complexity. Does that make sense? I can't really point to a percentage one-for-one situation. Seth is asking, do I use a dev site or staging to test? For complex websites, yes. Seth, I used to do staging sites for all the websites, but honestly, for a brochure site that's not running very many plugins, it's just overkill. I just don't have problems with those because when we build a basic brochure site, it's using all the same plugin stack. It's just basic. We build with Beaver Builder for those things. Nothing ever breaks. But, for a complicated, we have several complicated sites. One that has a membership system and an LMS and an e-commerce system. It's incredibly complicated. Yeah, we're going to do staging tests on that one. And on those brochure sites, yeah, Paul's saying nothing ever breaks, quote unquote. If something happens to break on an update, you just roll back a backup and you're done. You're good. Because those are sites that don't have user updates. They don't have lots of, different changes from day to day. Frank is asking, do I ever offer an hour of content updates per month? Okay, great question, Frank. So some of the people that I provide coaching services to, and I do a lot of coaching of WordPress freelancers. Happy if anybody wants that. You can find me at nathaningram.com. Oftentimes the people that I coach will roll into this price 1 or 2 small changes per month. The small change being defined as maybe something I can read the ticket, make the change, and get out of the website in 15 minutes or less. I'll do 2 of those for you every month. No more. Anything else is hourly after that. So that's a good approach for maybe just to include in the basic care plan. That's important because a lot of times you're going to probably do that anyway. And it's just more trouble to bill the client than it's worth for 15 minutes of work. So just roll that into the care plan. And that way there's some boundaries around how much time you can spend on a site before you feel, legitimized to ask for the client to pay more. The other thing I'll say to that question, Frank, is there are certain clients that don't want to log into their website at all. They want us to handle all the content updates. They're just going to email the content updates into a trouble ticket and we take care of that. For those clients, I typically have a larger starting price. So maybe it's a basic website. Maybe they have a blog and it's a brochure site with a blog. And so they're paying, roughly $100 a month for the care plan. But if we're doing content updates, it's going to be $200 a month. And that covers all their content updates and basics. They rarely use more time than that in a month. Oftentimes it's less. And, it certainly works itself out over time that I think we're probably even making money on the, more money than we're spending time on those sorts of clients. All right. Any other questions? John's asking about ticketing systems. There's a bunch out there, John. Just about any that anybody's going to mention are going to work. Honestly, you need to try them for yourself because the UI and the workflow, it's going to depend. Most have a trial version. Just do the one, play with all of them and find the one that works best for you. All right, any other questions? We've hit noon, and so I need to wrap up here pretty quick. Any last questions or comments? Adrian, what do you do if a site has a lot of plugins to take care of? For example, WooCommerce, some plugins with license on ThemeForest. Oh, yeah. Gosh. Wonderful, right? So that's a hard question to answer other than for me to say this. The more complex a site is, the more costly the care plan should be. So if a site takes you longer to manage, charge more. A typical e-commerce site, we're not going to manage that for less than around $200 a month. Connie, how do you convince folks to move to your care plan if you didn't initially build their site? Great question. Normally, if somebody is seeking you out because they, and they might be a candidate for a care plan, it's because the site has problems and they need somebody to fix it and then care for it. So you just leverage that situation. Hey, if you want the site to be in a better situation to begin with, where I just manage your site from here forward and we're going to, avoid a lot of these problems in the future, this is what it costs on a monthly basis. I just rolled a site into our care plan that I did not design, and it was because the original web developer disappeared, and they wanted somebody they could rely on and would be there for the long term. And quite frankly, I've had clients say, well, why do I need to pay you $100, $200 a month to manage the site? My other developer only charged me $20 a month or, $50 a year for hosting. And my answer to that, and it's kind of snarky, but it works, is this. Yeah, but that developer disappeared, right? Like they didn't stay in business. So it's the same scenario as why I got on my soapbox about, paying for premium plugins because you want them to be around. If you want your web developer to be around and have a successful business, then they need to be honored for their time and money. Your other developer probably went out of business because he wasn't charging enough money and therefore went out of business, right? I mean, it's kind of a funny thing and I'll laugh a lot about it. But look, a good business person is going to realize the wisdom in that answer. We charge for the value of our service. Your site will be secure and safe and function well, and this ensures that we'll be around for the long term as well. Okay, any other questions or comments before I wrap this up? All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us for 6 hours this week. You put a good investment of time in this webinar series, and we certainly appreciate all of you who did that. I really genuinely hope that what we've done this week has been helpful to you. I hope that you've learned some great things about WordPress security. Most importantly, that you can now take everything you've learned and leverage it into a care plan that will allow you to stabilize your business and make more money to secure your business and your lifestyle. Thanks again for hanging out. Thanks, Michael, for everything he did this week as well. Thanks for all the iThemes folks that helped out in the chat. My name is Nathan Ingram. From everybody here at iThemes, have a wonderful rest of the week. If you're going to be in WordCamp Miami, make sure you look me up. I'll be there as well. And I'll see you next time here on iThemes Training, where we go further together.